So pesto, when you think of it, you think of like basil, right? But pesto just means to like pound something in like a mortar and pestle.
Pesto.
Yeah. So it doesn't even need basil. But I put basil, I put carrot tops, I put pistachios, garlic scape, olive oil, and salt, and it was incredible.
Welcome, my friends, to the Beet podcast with the Garden Hermit, Jacques himself. We're actually hanging out in my backyard at the Epic Gardening headquarters, right next to the greenhouse. June gloom, Jacques.
Oh yeah, it's fully here.
Not the best vibe, but I have to say the light's nice here in the garden.
It is nice, and it's also nice to be in the experimental patch.
Yeah.
Where we're a little bit half and half here. The standard garden and the experiment zone.
Foot in two worlds. Well, why don't we talk about that to start? Because this was the biggest evolution in our gardening experience. I think this year is setting up this test garden where we're testing all these different common wisdoms that you hear. And so the way that you guys actually built this, you and Paul built a test garden in the backyard here. It's about 16 feet by 16 feet. And we divided that into a 4x4 grid of, this is a little confusing, of 4x4 plots. So there's 16 4x4 plots, which gives us the ability, and we kind of divided it with some lanyard, it gives us the ability to create very specific areas where we're measuring and monitoring certain experiments. So you're actually just wrapped on one of the coolest ones I think we've ever done. So why don't you just talk about that?
Yeah, that one was really fun. It's actually right behind me. And it's where we tested 14 different brands of bagged soil. So I went to a big box store, I went to a nursery, and I said, what do they have available in potting mix? First of all, I was shocked by the actual selection.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you go buy your regular thing. But when you're actually looking, like I was able to find, I think 20, and some of them were too close. I had to like cut it down, but there's a lot of selection out there. And it's hard to say which one is actually best for your garden, which one's actually going to perform well. So that's what we tested. We got 5-gallon grow bags, exact same pepper. The only thing that really changed was the soil. And it's actually quite stark in some cases.
It was stark. I mean, if you're watching the Beet podcast video channel, you might see a little glimpse of them, but on our main channel, you should see this video out pretty soon here. And it was honestly fascinating to me because, like you said, 14 different potting mixes or potting soils, some very premium, very high end, some dirt cheap, some from brands that people love, some from brands, frankly, that a lot of you guys listening right now probably would hate. And it's just really surprising. We had no biases going in, wasn't a sponsored thing or anything. And yeah, it's backyard science. Like, is it perfect? No, but we controlled as much as we could control. And I don't know, to me, what was striking was the power of synthetic fertilizers outweighs everything else. So even if you have this fully organic blend, super expensive, if you put synthetics that are like time released in your soil mix, you're gonna win, at least for that first grow.
Yeah, I know. The really curious thing for me would be to replicate this experiment, but with like an organic based fertilizer. But
just like all organics.
Yeah, but then those also need to break down, so it's hard to say whether it'll perform that well.
Yeah.
But I was actually really surprised by some of my favorites being in the middle. And I don't know, you guys will have to watch to see the full results here, but it was pretty interesting to see that synthetic fertilizer, I think in containers, makes sense most because you're not growing a long-term sort of biosphere underground. Like if I were to add synthetics to my garden in ground, I'd be killing a lot of life, whereas maybe in the container, there's not that much to kill anyway. So I could see that. I still practice organic gardening, but I could see how that works best in a container world.
Well, I can see why. I mean, think about it. Like, rewind time to when you first started growing. Oh, yeah. It wasn't even that long ago, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I had Miracle Grow.
The
blue stuff.
You had Miracle Grow with the little blue dots in it. And, we'd have to research, like, is that like a microplastic? Like, that's probably not great, I'm very, not on that train.
Trying to be clean.
But you think about it, man. You're a beginner. You want some success. To me, I'm a bit agnostic. Like, I don't use synthetics either, you know that, but I wouldn't judge someone if they did, especially when they're starting out. Like, you just want a pepper, you just want a tomato, and like if that gets you hooked and then you make a switch, like literally you and I both did, like how can I judge that if that's how I started?
No,
right?
I mean, the most important thing is to get people interested in growing their own food and gardening and let them choose their journey. And I think almost every gardener will eventually find that path because they want to support life. Once you start gardening more and more, you start noticing more things around you, the ecosystem, the birds, the bees, the bugs, and you start thinking like, actually would like to foster more of that. And I think that's just going to take somebody down the path already to just naturally become a more organic inclined gardener.
I mean, at the beginning of my journey, I did the classic mistake, which, honestly, if we ever were to start some soil company or something like that, I would delete this from the market if I could. Garden soil.
Yeah.
The rename.
Yeah.
I just say you got to rename.
Such a
that.
bad name.
It's such a bad name because garden soil does not imply you can't really
anything.
grow vegetables in it, right? And you know what I will say, going back to the pepper experiment, if we were to give you a bit of a nugget, you watching and listening, before you watch the video, it's try to avoid soil mixes with a lot of wood products mixed in because it's a cheap way to fill bulk up. And you're actually going to get a bit of nitrogen lockout, and that's more or less what we saw with some of those mixes.
Absolutely. It's when the only ingredient is forest product, then that's generally not going to do that well, in my experience. I think there's probably a way for it to do well, but not the cheap way. So.
Well, that's the thing we talked about too, is like once we finished this experiment up, we were like, cool, we found some interesting winners. We found some like budget picks that performed really well. We found some, premium picks that didn't do that well. And then we asked ourselves, what if you just came up with some sort of amendment protocol for a mix straight out of the bag? So no matter what, before you grow something out of a bag mix, you're amending the bag. Can you normalize all of that? Can you make a bad mix better, right?
Yeah.
By just adding some proprietary little mix of your own into it.
You just made me want to do a different video testing 3 different things.
Okay, tell me.
So we need a control, so just the soil.
Yeah.
Then you would have actually 4 things, I guess. Liquid fertilizer on a schedule. And then you would have organic fertilizer in one, and then inorganic, like synthetic.
Synthetic but granular.
Yeah. So then you have the 4 next to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Basic soil, liquid fert, organic fert, synthetic fert. Mm-hmm. And then you let that run. But you do it on a smaller scale. Maybe you just choose like the standouts.
I think that'd be super interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, this experiment we just ran kind of opens the door to a lot of fun fertilizer, container, grow experiments that we could do that I think I would learn a lot from it.
Because frankly, we're all operating on assumptions.
A lot of us are. Yeah, a lot of us are. We just talked. I mean, yesterday I put out this video on our Instagram, if you guys don't follow us, but about the chicken eggshell sort of myth that you hear a lot, where it's like, don't feed your chickens raw eggshells because they can get sick, and also because they'll eat the eggshells and then they'll see their own eggs and then they'll peck their eggs, break them, and eat their whole egg.
Yeah.
And you see that repeated all the time, and when you hear it, you go, oh, sure, makes sense, like whatever. But the truth is that just doesn't tend to happen. And when you think about from a biological perspective as well as a behavioral perspective, it's like, well, their feed gets, there's calcium in the feed.
Yeah, hopefully.
Right? Hopefully you're feeding them fortified feed. And they're not exposed to anything in their own egg they produce daily that would not already be in like the poopy soil they're pecking around.
That's a good point. Like when you mentioned that, I was like, I'm throwing stuff into the dirt, into their poop all the time.
A lot of times it's like semi-rotting food.
Yeah, and they're going to town.
They're going for it.
And I've had popped eggshells in my actual nesting box, and it's not like after that they start pecking other eggs. I think sometimes one breaks, they eat it, and they move on with their lives.
That's exactly what I think happens. Because what I've noticed is I've had a couple broody hens lately.
Yeah.
And they have been aggressive and accidentally popped one of their own eggs.
Yeah.
And all I notice is they just eat a little yolk and then they just move on.
Yeah, it just kind of soaks
in. It doesn't
in.
like trigger some addiction.
No, they're not like cracking eggs after that point.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm excited about right now is that summer is around the corner, like literally within a week or 2, I think. And we've started to turn over our gardens. And for example, I've almost harvested all my garlic. We just harvested all the garlic here. Onions are on their way out. Summer is really starting to feel like it's taken hold. We even have ripe tomatoes right now.
You know what? I just for breakfast had a tomato from another experiment. We talked yesterday about some experiments, but we did a tomato transplant experiment where
that one was really cool too.
That one was really cool. I'm not going to spoil the results on that one, but we buried a tomato super deep. We did the trenched buried method, and then we just buried it at normal height. But once we pulled up the roots and examined, I had tomatoes.
Yeah.
And I had some really tasty ones. And so a little dark red, nice slicer with a little salt in early June. That's a win.
Not bad. Actually, I had one of them too last night for dinner. He doesn't know, but...
You ate one of mine? You took one? Oh, man. It was good, though, right?
It was good.
It was good. So you're right. I mean, the garlic just came out. Better success this year with garlic on my end. I don't know how yours is doing.
Mine's actually doing really well. For some weird reason, I only grew hardneck. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't remember when that happened, but I pretty much only planted music variety, and I'm very happy with it.
Music was one of my best, so I'm not surprised. Yeah. So that, and you're right. The onions this year... I think I've figured them out. I mean, really, I think I've had 2 years of good onion success here in San Diego, and I think it's really just about variety and time.
Yeah.
And my onions, I mean, I've got probably 4 or 5 dozen really nice, well-cured onions, white yellow and red,
Yeah.
just like beautiful varieties. But I think you're right. Like the June gloom's here, and the season's starting to slightly change, at least for us, from spring to summer. And so to me, the garden always looks a little patchy in transition, a little janky.
A little transition-y.
Which I'm not super pleased about, but I mean, you're right. I mean, my tomatoes are doing really well. This year, Jacques, I did sort of like an eating tomato row, and I did a saucing tomato row.
Okay.
So my eating tomato row is on the back side of the garden. It's got string trellises, just like individual poly twine with tomato clips. And I've got about 12 varieties of cherries, pears, and big beefsteaks. And then, because I had so much fun with the sauce last year.
Zesty salsas, all sorts of options.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much you can do. I planted about 18 to 24, because there's some in the front yard too, San Marzanos.
Okay.
And I just did that on big, thick bamboo stakes.
Oh, yeah.
So stab those in the ground.
1-inch ones.
Yeah, very, very thick, tall, like 6 to 8 inch ones. And San Marzanos are indeterminate, so they will climb, and theoretically they'd extend past that, but if I have 20 of them, I don't really need them to max out. So that's kind of what's going on over here, but what are you transitioning into summer with?
First, I wanted to touch on the onions, because you actually put me on to growing onions.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was as worth it as it is, but that 4 to 5 or like 5 or 6 dozen onions that you got all came out of one of these 4x4 plots.
Yeah, 4x4.
So like you could grow a lot of onions in a very small amount of space without really doing any work. The only thing you have to do is make sure it gets water at the beginning, and that's it, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
So I love that. I'm very happy with my onions. In terms of my tomatoes, I actually have noticed that doing a Florida weave in a raised bed has presented some challenges for me.
Oh, really?
It's actually not as chill as I was hoping for.
So what's your setup right now?
So, well, my tomato setup is out of control. There's all over the place. The whole garden is covered in tomatoes, but I have a Florida weave in ground, and the nice thing about that is that I could walk around both sides.
Okay.
So I can manage both sides. In the raised bed, I didn't think about how difficult it would be to like walk. I can't like really reach the other side.
Okay.
Because I planted too much stuff on the other side. But I'm producing a lot of fruit, but man, it's an actual jungle. Like there's vines everywhere. I have a little bit of powdery mildew showing up. It's become a little bit of a chore, a situation, if you will. But everything else, like all my other tomatoes are doing really wonderfully. Even those are doing wonderfully. It's just a lot of work. And I am starting to ripen cherry tomatoes. I think I have my first slicer coming the beginning of next week. And right now, what I'm most stoked on is that my peppers are actually growing really well so far. Last year was really weird. I didn't get a true pepper harvest, I think, until like August. It was like ridiculous. Really? Like I had a little trickle of peppers, but not like an actual harvest. And it was just so cool last year. So this year, the June gloom came a little bit late, which I'm very pleased about. It just kind of arrived. And so I think my peppers had a chance to actually grow. So peppers and eggplants look phenomenal. The only thing that I'm like a little bit behind on that you're like absolutely destroying me on is the squash.
Oh, yeah.
Man, you got squash raining over here.
Yeah.
And I'm like eking out 1 or 2 a week right now.
I mean, I'll trade you at this point because it's too much. But what we did is we planted a ton of squash at like really not recommended spacing in one of the backyard plots. We planted them about 1 or 2 feet apart with the idea that I'm just going to throw a stake in the ground and tie them up and just grow them up so they don't sprawl as much, under the theory that I should get less powdery mildew, less issues. You were complimenting my squash yesterday in the garden while we were working on something, and you said they looked immaculate, and I actually looked closer, and there is PM on them. So they're not that good, but you're right. I am getting squash like crazy this year. Yeah. And to me, I've written off that I won't get powdery mildew. Like I know it's happening. It's here. And so my approach to squash this year has been start early and start often. And so you just keep replacing it because it's so prolific, right? I mean, you get it start to produce in like 30 days or something. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
And so, I mean that, and then for me, the pepper patch has moved this year to the front of the backyard garden, if you can picture that for those of you who watch our homesteading channel. But what we did is a bit more of a wild design. It's just kind of like a big triangle grid.
Loaded with peppers.
Loaded with maybe 20 varieties. And then something new you turned me on to that I think you just adapted from like an orchard technique is just planting 2 peppers of the same variety right next to one another.
Yeah.
Right?
I've kind of heard people mention it, but the idea is that if you put 2 of the same varieties next to each other, while a pepper doesn't need another pepper to get pollinated, the more flowers you have, the better the odds are. Like they could kind of like bump into each other at the right times, and they could also support each other. So the other thing that's really interesting about peppers, I think, is that they produce better when they have a little bit of shade.
Yes.
So if you put them very close to each other, they will sort of shade each other to some extent. And somehow, counterintuitively, that is net positive. So I think that's the idea there.
I think it's some combination of the blasting light and heat. Like if you get it over about 85 Fahrenheit and you're not shade clothing your peppers, I think it's more about to me, it feels like it's a little more about the heat than the raw light.
Yeah,
but
I think so.
Both seem to have some impact. And it's kind of counterintuitive because if you think about the solanaceous crops like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, it's really that order in which they like the sun. Eggplants seem to be able to take the most.
Yeah,
and
they can take the most heat, I think.
Heat, at the very least, heat. And I just threw a couple eggplants in the garden as well. And I don't know, what else is going on in the summer garden is a lot of orchard care. So we have a backyard orchard now, an extension from the grape trellis, the bananas and the avocados, but now an Asian pear, European pear, a cherry, and a persimmon. It's actually right behind you now. That
they all look good.
The logic on that, which I think it's playing out, is my greenhouse has a slanted roof and has a gutter system. And so what I'm going to do is I just chained the gutter to the floor, and I'm going to dig a trench to the high point, and that's going to spill the water back down through this kind of L-shaped orchard. Because I have like 2 trees on one side, 2 trees on another in an L sort of shape. And so I think that's kind of my way of getting like gray water, so to speak, to the orchard.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. And then one thing I think both of us did a good job on in springtime is we had a lot of flowers. And I feel like both of us right now, I'm going to call us out, is that we're a little bit light on the summer flower vibe.
Yeah, we are.
So I think we should work on that one next.
Yeah, the only saving grace I have are these branching sunflowers.
Yeah, I agree, same.
I think are just a part of my backyard now because the birds are eating and pooping the seeds out all over the place. And so every spring, I just kind of pick out the ones that I want to leave and the other ones I just will remove. But I have some crazy ones in the test garden right now that just look really, really cool.
Very nice.
Next to the corn that I just put in. So every season in the garden, it's an opportunity to change your methods just slightly. And it might be like a best practice that everyone should do in theory, or it just might be something that works really well for your climate. Some things I've changed, Jacques, compared to last year. I think a lot of my mistakes around planting have just been around timing. And I think it's mostly just because of our climate, because our climate's very forgiving. And so you think you can get away with stuff, and you technically can, but you just don't get the yields that you might want.
Yeah.
And so for me, like my journey with garlic over the last 4 or 5 years has mostly been a journey of figuring out the right time to get it in the ground, less about like how to actually care for it once it's in the ground. I would say same with onions. And I would even say same with like the squash and the peppers and the tomatoes we talked about. It's knowing based on historical patterns, like where it's most likely to get hot in the summer. So I'm like, oh, okay, I should back my tomatoes up a couple weeks then and try to read the future a bit. And so like, those are some timing things that I've changed. I don't know if you have any of those yourself.
Yeah, actually, I think this year my tomato timing and pepper timing was a little bit later. And not later in terms of when I put them out, but later in terms of when I started the seed.
Yeah.
So I feel like last year I started everything too early. And I had to do like the potting up game. And then by the time I planted them out, they were a little bit too leggy, maybe even starting to have a little bit of disease show up from just like sitting too long. So this year I pushed all that a little bit further down the line.
Yeah.
And I think that paid off. But one thing I've noticed is that every year, this June gloom that we're referring to hits at a different time. And it's all really like super, super nice. And then it hits, and then that's when the disease starts.
Yeah.
So right now, like literally from one week to the next, I just started seeing like disease in my tomatoes, for example, after not having any. So for me, like the timing push, going a little bit later, but now I've also learned from last year is that I need to start more tomatoes now. Like, so the more, like you mentioned, like squash, like, you know, you're going to get powdery mildew. So like you could fight it for the rest of your season, or you could just start a new round and have somewhere new to put it. So what I've learned this year is that when this period comes, like right now, this week, I should be starting more tomatoes, more squash, more cucumbers, and have that cycle ready so I can actually put them out in the garden.
You know, it brings up a tomato timing thing for myself. So this year, I started my tomatoes earlier and babied them more. So I did that pot up game. And what happened to me is exactly what you referenced. Now, I think I dodged most of the problems, but my tomatoes on my back side, the ones that I'm using mostly for eating, not the sauce tomatoes, those were 14 inches or so tall. maybe
Okay.
a little bit more when I put them in the ground. And so I actually used a power planter auger,
Yeah.
dug down 6 to 8 inches and did a deep bury. Not because I necessarily thought it's a better technique, it's just because without doing that, they would be too fragile
Yes.
above ground because they were just starting to bend
Too
over.
leggy.
Yeah, and so what I noticed is, counterintuitively, that ended up slowing them down post-transplant because they took time to set roots on that stem that's underground now, which gave them the sort of slowdown I needed to not get too crazy big into this June bloom to have all the
interesting.
disease actually start to happen. Now, I think mine are okay right now, but to your point, we just started a whole second round of new tomato varieties we're testing out actually with Botanical Interest, our seed
Oh,
company.
yeah.
But we figured, why not do a second round of seeds we haven't tested yet? But yeah, those are actually right to my right here, if you're watching the video, in the greenhouse for an entire sort of back half of summer patch of tomatoes. So timing, man, it's very, very important.
It's kind of the weird thing about where we are, because San Diego, people are like, oh, zone 10B.
It's
That
so
means
easy.
It's so easy. It's so hot. It actually doesn't get that hot. The summer can be really weird, like when it shows up, when it doesn't show up. And so, yeah, like I can start another round of tomatoes today, and I will still get plenty of harvest, even like up till November.
Yeah.
So you do have some forgiveness, but it's also nice because, the disease never leaves. It's so nice here. The pests have no reason to leave San
They
Diego.
don't go, yeah.
The disease doesn't get frozen out.
Yeah.
So it's just here, and you just have to learn how to adapt to it, basically.
Well, I just think every climate has its challenges,
Yeah,
right? And it's
totally.
the grass is greener type thing. Because if I think about maybe a zone 7 or so,
Yeah.
I think, man, it really would be nice to know when my season starts and ends, and I could plan around really concrete dates.
Yeah.
And just have a season grow out as I expected. Now, of course, if you're listening in zone 7, you're like, it's not how it works,
Yeah.
dude. That's not how it works.
There's fall, spring,
Summer
all that.
storms,
Yeah.
like all this kind of stuff. I get that, but you always want to look at a different climate and say like, wouldn't that be
Yeah.
kind of nice? So
Like, oh, a lot of cherry trees. That sounds great.
yeah, I know. So, man, some other things I've changed year to year is I guess the biggest one to me, it's another planting one. It's instead of doing like a rip and replace of a particular bed or a particular zone of the garden, it's more of like a transition over time. So like the best example is in spring, where my squash is now, it was all root crops. It was
Yeah.
like turnips, radish, and
right.
beets. And I removed half and planted my seed potatoes. Then I still had half the turnips looking good, right? And then when the seed potatoes started to come up, I harvested the other half of the turnips, beets, and root crops, and then I put in the squash. And so then it didn't look completely bare. So that's more of like an aesthetic or planting timing technique. But to me, I felt better when I was in the garden.
Yeah.
It just didn't look as empty.
No, I agree. That's always actually a really hard one when you transition.
Yeah.
That hard shift from winter to spring.
It hurts.
Where like everything's gone, and then you put in these tiny little seedlings
Yeah.
that will grow, but won't really grow a lot for a month.
Yeah.
The one thing that I have changed, I keep saying I'll do, this year I did do, was I did space out things a little bit further. So I didn't get greedy. I only put like 2 tomatoes on an 8-foot section of net. On my Florida weave, I put like 3 feet between each rows in ground. So like that's all working really well for me. And the other thing that I'm really staying on top of is my eggplant and my okra. They're, like we mentioned earlier, they love the heat. So this year I tented them with like frost fabric
To
for
heat
like
them
a
up a
month
bit. Yeah.
to get them really going. And
Yeah.
then once they got like tripled in size, I took it off and now they're thriving.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to like give little jump starts.
You sped them up through
Yeah.
the slightly milder period.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because I want that harvest. Last year I barely got any okra, for example.
Yeah.
And I did get eggplant, but it was really late. So
Yeah.
this year I'm trying to hack my way through it a little bit, pay more attention to the plants that need certain things, give it to them when they need it, and then take your foot off the gas a little bit later and let things just kind of happen.
I really like that one. I mean, I think the thing that I learned from you last year is you did that with your peppers last
Yeah.
year, where you frost blanketed them in basically the opposite use case. You
Yeah.
wanted to get it a little bit warmer, and your peppers were, I would say, a good 3-4 weeks ahead of mine last year for that reason alone. I think we planted them around the same time. We've been known to grow our fair share of annuals here at Epic Gardening: vegetables, fruits, trees, although I guess trees are perennials.
They're
but
the bread and butter for
they're
us.
still edibles. And I think I'm a bit of a convert into both perennial edibles, but also just landscaping.
Yeah.
Like just scaping that land and making it look better. And the thing that converted me is the evolution of the Epic Pond in the backyard, which you can actually
I've
hear
been eyeing
right
it
now.
this whole time.
Yeah, and I can't. I'm facing away from it, so I'm very sad. But to me, we had Greg Whitsock, the pond guy, both on the show and out recently, and he actually gave us a compliment on the pond, which to me, that's the pinnacle, because this guy knows ponds.
Not the first time, though.
No, he trashed the pond the first time, rightfully so. And then now he said it's a Ferrari in a Ferrari.
Yeah.
Because the first time he said it's a Ferrari engine in a minivan, meaning that his pond was amazing and the landscaping was bad. And he was right. And now he said that the landscaping is at Ferrari tier. And so to me, even you and I, we were up on the roof a couple days ago, and you remarked like how good that pond area looks relative to the rest of the garden. And it got me thinking, oh yeah, why don't I do more perennial or floral sort of ornamental landscaping around the edible garden in the backyard?
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah,
And
around
so,
the chicken coop where there's nothing else happening. Like there's
why
a lot
not?
of options.
There's so many avenues for that. And so I'm kind of curious, like, you've been a little bit more on this train, I think, than me, because you have more ornamentals just on your property in general.
Yeah, that's true.
But what are you doing around that?
So one thing that I really like is I always like having something growing. So like when we talked about that winter-spring transition where you clear everything out, I love having something still there behind me. So for example, I have like a wall of Pride of Madeira on one side. That's always producing something. It's always growing. There's bees on it. And it's creating a green wall for me as a backdrop. So it always feels like I'm in the garden, even if it's just bare dirt. The other thing I'm doing is I'm breaking up my garden quite literally by putting in like what I call pollinator patches throughout the garden space. So for example, in my bigger garden, like the one by my greenhouse, I have my upper area where I have all these tomatoes, and then I have my lower, bigger area, but in between is a big patch of perennial flowers. So I have like blanket flowers, I have straw flowers, which have become kind of perennial here in San Diego for me.
For your garden,
yeah,
for
for my
sure.
garden. I just added some echinaceas. I have all sorts of different sort of things going in on that side. On to the right of that, I even put a California native wildflower patch. And what it's doing is it's providing texture, color, longevity to the season, where I know I will always have something growing and or blooming at any time of the year to break up my garden. So even if I have new transplants in, I still have a really big plant next to it that looks lush. It just makes the garden feel like it's more intentional, like it's been there for longer. But one thing that I haven't done as much that I think you've done a better job of is putting edible perennials. Like your artichoke patch is one of the things that gives me envy all the time.
Yeah.
Because I love how big it gets. I love how many artichokes it produces. And it just autopilot. Like they fall over and then a new one comes up. It's like crazy.
Yeah.
It's just adding a lot of texture in life.
You know, the thing that I thought spring was really great here because of, at this point, effectively, it's a lot of the self-sown, resown annuals that have come back. Like we're sitting next to the greenhouse right now, and you couldn't have probably a month ago because there was so much nasturtium growing here.
I could see about 1,000 seeds ready for next year.
There's gonna be a ton coming next year for sure, but it looked really good for, I would say, a good 45 to 60 days.
Totally.
Looked amazing, and now I'm in that period where it doesn't look as good. And so you sort of have this ebb and flow, like even with the artichoke patch you mentioned, now it's in its bad phase where they've flopped.
That's true.
They're blooming, and it'd be nice if they were blooming and not flopped over, but they're blooming and flopped over, which is unfortunate. So I don't want to remove the bloom or the plant yet until it's done blooming, but it would have been nice if it was sitting up while it was doing that. So what I'll do is eventually I will chop and compost those. And I'm still trying to play around with like, what's that mid-season plant I can put in place of the artichoke so it's not just barren for 6 months.
Right.
Because that doesn't look good. But what I have done is on that chimney, on that side of my house, I put a big orange bougainvillea that's slowly making its way up. So of course, and eventually that'll be all the way up. And then I've got some mandevilla, a little bit slower, but it's to your point of, cool, even if I don't replace that artichoke and it's a little bit barren there, I still have the backdrop of the bougainvillea and the mandevilla in a place where I'm never going to grow anything edible.
No.
Right? It just, why? I don't need to.
You don't need it, like the space, it's not ideal anyway. So it makes sense.
What's the point? And so, I think about that a lot. And so now I sort of start thinking, cool, like the pond is pure enjoyment, which is why it's so obvious to put landscaping there. But I go, why am I like separating it in my mind? Why don't I just landscape everywhere? So around even the front yard, raised beds.
Yeah,
why wouldn't
totally.
Why wouldn't I put little alyssum or a little
they don't have to be
nasturtium?
big, right? Like some of these plants that have been here, like they're big-ish, but some of them are not that large, and they just look great year-round.
They look great year-round, and if they don't look great year-round, it's better to have something look good for half a year than look bad for a whole year.
Yeah.
Right? So that, and I even told you, I think early this spring, I was like, my focus this year is on beauty in the garden. And I think I did a better job.
Yeah.
But given that my edible skills are pretty decent these days, it's like, okay, well, why don't I work on the landscaping stuff? And you actually did on the backside. If you go to Jacques' channel and check out one of his recent tours, you'll see some of the stuff he's been doing in his chicken coop area, as well as like kind of on that backside of your house.
Yeah.
You put like a whole native strip in on the backside of your house.
That is actually something we've been trying to do more. So if we have areas in the garden that are just not ideal for like vegetable gardening, or I don't want to do a lot of annual work there, like right outside my bedroom window, that's a great place to add in that native garden. So what we did is we went to a local native nursery, picked up a bunch of like San Diego natives even.
Yeah.
And we built out an entire area in the springtime, because native plants want to go in when there's still like free water, because they're not going to get irrigated. So we built this like really cool, I think it looks amazing, patch of native plants covered in nice wood chip, and then bordered in random rocks that I actually just had around the property.
Yeah.
I've been like pulling out like boulders all over my garden.
You've got a lot of stuff buried in the ground.
Throwing them in the
place.
corner. I'm just like, get it away from me.
Yeah.
And so this time I had to go around and find everywhere where I hid them. I rebuilt that garden. And I like the native angle too, because it brings in more of like the native bees. It's something that you don't mess with. So I don't really like prune it. I don't water it. I don't fertilize it. So I've even seen lizards living in there now.
Yeah.
Birds hanging out in there more. And I think a water feature is probably on the horizon, because
we've been talking about that for a while. You were anti for a while, and I think you finally
I think I'm like I
finally
get
come
it.
around.
I get it.
He's finally
that
come
trickle
around.
in the background.
Yeah,
it's nice.
Well, when we had Greg on the podcast, the thing he said, because he thinks that no garden's complete without a water feature, and I think obviously no water feature is complete without a garden, but he isn't wrong that the sound is like probably the most important part. Of course, the look, we're all drawn to water as humans, but the sound, to me, we're hearing it right now.
Yeah.
It's just very peaceful. So because we are getting closer towards summer, I've started working some recipes in, and we've come up with a lot of cool ones. Honestly, I have to give most of the credit to my girlfriend, because she's come up with some really fun recipes with some of the excess that I've been growing. This year, I had a ton of crazy carrot success.
Oh yeah.
Like easily my best carrot year ever. Probably about 200 to 250 beautiful carrots.
You had them over a pretty long time this year, I feel like.
2 or 3 months, I would say. Just pulled nearly all of them last week.
Okay.
So the question is, when you have that many carrots, what are you supposed to do? Like roast carrots, sure, but I'll share one right out the gate that I think you might like, because it feels like it's a little up your Bulgarian alley, although I don't think it's a Bulgarian recipe.
Yeah, we might take credit.
You might take credit, yeah. And you know what? It's all good. So here's what you end up doing. You take the carrots.
Okay.
You peel. Just a light peel. You just don't want the skin on.
Yeah. The dirtiness.
Yeah, just a little bit of the dirtiness. So you peel. Then you take a mandolin, right? On a pretty thin setting, like almost the thinnest you can do.
Okay.
Wear a cut-proof glove for sure, because you're doing this in a weird way, and you're actually mandolining it lengthwise.
Oh,
So
ribbons.
you're creating ribbons, right? And you're creating like relatively thin ribbons. So the salad's bulk is literally just carrots.
Okay.
There's no other vegetable added, which sounds crazy, right? But it works when you ribbonify them, because then you get a different texture. It's not all this crazy crunch. It's like a thin crunch.
Yeah, that's true. It's more
Right?
delicate.
So here's what you do then. You go a sort of honey mustard style vinaigrette, maybe
Okay.
just a mustard vinaigrette. You do black sesame seeds, you do sesame oil, and then what my girlfriend, so that was the base recipe. But what my girlfriend did is she added chopped peanuts to tie it up a little bit.
Ooh.
And then you get
That's
a
good.
crunch, but one crunch is a bit more fatty with the peanuts, and one crunch is a bit more vegetal. And
That sounds amazing.
we'll slam this salad. I mean, we will slam it. Like on my plate, it'll be half that and half whatever the hell else we're eating.
And you're happy.
So, and I'm stoked. I mean, it's a really, really tasty salad. So that's something that we've done. I don't know what you've been cooking up lately.
One thing that I finally tried, speaking of carrots, because like every time Kevin or I post anything about carrots, and they're like, oh, did you know you can eat the tops? Did you know you can eat the tops? You can make carrot top pesto, this and that. So we started like giving them to the chickens, say like, we're not wasting them, like they're going somewhere. But finally I was like, you know what? I'm gonna try this carrot top pesto. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it with garlic scapes. And it was actually really good.
Yeah.
It was really, really good. So pesto, when you think of it, you think of like basil, right? But pesto just means to like pound something in like a mortar and pestle.
Pesto.
Yeah. So it doesn't even need basil. So, but I put basil, I put carrot tops, I put pistachios, garlic scape, olive oil and salt, and it was incredible.
So you cut in a little of the carrots, but basil's still in it too.
It's mostly Carrot Top.
Oh, it was?
Like, it was probably 80% Carrot Top.
Okay.
And it was actually phenomenal. It tasted kind of like carrot,
Yeah.
like reminiscent of carrot.
A little hint.
Yeah, like it was there, but you couldn't find it.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was good. I would highly encourage and recommend it. The other thing that I love doing every summer, I look forward to, is to start making some of like the Bulgarian stuff that I grew up eating.
Yeah.
So that would be things like kepala, which is basically like a roasted pepper and vegetable spread. So I roast eggplants, peppers, and I chop them up with fresh tomatoes, parsley, olive oil.
Oh, man.
It's so good. It's
You
like,
gave me that last year.
Yeah. It's
That sounds so good.
It's
You know, the
just
other
delicious.
thing you gave me that I've adapted, I took a Bulgarian version, the one you gave me, and
Okay.
we've done some weird stuff with it. Maybe we Americanized it a little
Okay.
bit, but it was your Bulgarian potato salad,
Oh, yeah.
where you basically peel and really rough chunk the potatoes out.
Yeah.
They're still like almost quartered, I guess I
Yeah,
would say. They're
they
pretty
can be
big
pretty big.
chunks. And then what we did is you boil them, right? You kind of rough them up a little bit. You throw it in with some spice. What spices you use in yours?
I usually, man, I just blanked on it. I can't even remember how to make it. Dill is a common one.
Dill.
Yeah, dill is
Yeah.
a common one.
So what we did is we went dill, I think probably some salt, pepper.
Yeah.
But what we wanted that we felt that we were missing, at least from your recipe, which was also very good, by the way, was I wanted a little bit of acidity. So we did pickled red onions in it.
Oh, okay.
And
That
we
sounds
threw
delicious.
just a tiny little bit of, I think like an avocado mayo in there.
Okay.
Just a tiny little bit, just to like give a film almost.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, whatever fresh herbs. So like cut some fresh dill or some savory or some oregano or whatever. And you throw that on the side of like a piece of fish or something like that. That was a great summer classic for us. Because
Yeah.
then you serve that one cold and
Yeah,
it stores
exactly.
really well.
Yeah.
So it's something about serving it cold. It's basic, because to me, I gotta be honest, my hot take, I like American potato salad, trash.
Not
That's
that
a
into it.
trash.
Yeah.
It's a trash product and no one should like it.
Yeah.
When you know how to make a fresh potato salad.
Yeah.
And so that's what we've been
Yeah, I guess I just remembered kind of the basics. It's olive oil, vinegar, like chopped up Kalamata olives,
The olive.
and like parsley, salt. And you could do that hot, like while the potato's hot, or you can do it cold.
Yeah.
Either way, it's delicious.
Yeah, so
love
that's what we felt.
Yeah.
We felt yours was missing. And, no offense, Bulgarians,
it's fine.
sorry. It's just.
I don't even know if it's Bulgarian.
We Filipinoed it up a little bit,
Yeah.
let's say. We threw some pickled onions and some mayo.
I
on there.
like that. That sounds great.
It's good.
Yeah.
But just finding ways to make do with surplus, because we're going to have a lot of potatoes actually
Yeah.
coming soon. So
Same.
I wanted to resurrect some recipes I actually had to use a lot during 2019 during my survival challenge.
Oh.
So there's a few that I loved, and one was, I don't think I'll do it the exact same way, but it was a grunion potato pancake. And so I went out to the ocean and foraged for all these fish,
Yeah,
right?
the grunion run.
The grunion run, they spawn on the beach. And then I cooked them up and then mashed them into potatoes with like a little bit of olive oil. And
Interesting.
it was actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Now, I just want to try a straight up smashed potato again. It's been a while since
Yeah.
I've done that. I want to try chips. Actually making your own potato chips with a mandolin is pretty easy. If you get like a
Sure.
spray oil,
Yeah.
so just you mandolin them, right? You do a spray oil and you like sprinkle over some seasonings and then you just bake. And you can eat a whole potato like that. You barely put any oil on it
Easy.
at all. So it's basically like a baked potato,
Yeah.
right? So to me, that's a big win.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I think we both need help on is what to do with all these eggs.
Yeah.
we're getting
oh my God.
both a little overloaded in eggs. One of my favorite things to do last summer was eggs in purgatory, which is where you take some fresh tomatoes and you start stewing them in some like olive oil. You can throw in a little bit of hot pepper, and you just poach your eggs directly in that tomato
Yeah.
sort of deliciousness.
What I've learned from you on that is don't call it anything, because if you do eggs plus tomatoes, everyone says you're
Don't
stealing
claim
their
any
recipe.
nation.
Don't claim
No
any
nation
nation
state.
on that. Yeah, don't. Everyone's like, it's shakshuka.
No, yeah,
this,
it's tomatoes
that.
and eggs, okay?
Yeah, it's
like,
just-
I'm not.
let's just relax.
I invented it. Nobody
just-
else has ever made it before.
Let's just relax. But yeah, no, I think the thing that I was surprised you hadn't been on, because you're a very practically minded cook, is like you were never on the frittata game until
No,
recently.
I wasn't.
And that's the easiest way to kill a dozen
Yeah.
eggs. Easy,
Yeah.
easy. And you get a lot of protein and fats out of it, which
Yeah.
is, I'm trying to eat some more of that. So a lot of different recipes. Epic homesteading. We're going to be doing more cooking episodes. Those of you who watch We'll make more entertaining ones. We'll make better ones. Some of the ones we made aren't that good. They're a little too weird. We get it. We're going to make more common recipes. But
Recipes for the people.
recipes for the people, not just freaky garden frittata and you know, whatever. But anyways, been fun, Jacques. More to come with Jacques this season. You can check his channel out, Jacques in the Garden. Good luck in the garden and keep on growing.